All right, folks, let's make a start. I'm Glenn Gerard. I'm the head of enterprise sales for the federal government and Atlantic Canada. Helping me out today is Robert Tran. Quick housekeeping item. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat, and Robert will make sure that I see them, or he'll ask me them directly. Make sure we get any of your questions answered. We will be sending out the details around this via white paper and a link to download the companion white paper after the webinar, and Robert will be posting this presentation, this webinar on YouTube next week. So with that, I'm going to make a start. I will very quickly give everybody a couple of seconds. If you have a question that you're desperate to get answered today, or that has just jumped in your mind, please throw it in the chat now, and I'll try to make sure that we get to it as we go. I don't want anybody to leave here without having their questions answered. So with that, today's session is around modernizing without disruption, and it's in partnership with our friends at Palo Alto and VMWARE, and I'll certainly be diving deeper into our partnership with them as we go. Quick agenda, like everyone else, I love agenda slides as much as the rest of you, so I'll move on. Where did this come from? Why have we put this together? In talking to our customers, as we do every day, we start to see the same common challenges that they're running into. Legacy infrastructure is very brittle. It's not able to scale the way our customers like to have it scale. With that inflexibility comes a tremendous amount of security risks. We're all working under compressed timelines now, unlike ever before. I'm not going to use the unprecedented word. The most overused word of 2020 is unprecedented, but we are under extreme pressure around timelines, and of course nobody's budget is increasing, right? And where there is budget, it is being reallocated to other priorities. So in IT, we are under a crunch unlike anything we've ever seen before, and it's coming at us from all directions. Add to that what we're working with is a little bit of everything, right? Everything from mainframes. Some folks have got a little bit of stuff in the public space in AWS, even if it's just for development. A lot of shadow IT still happening in the cloud. If you think it's not happening where you're at, you trust me, it's happening. We're dealing with all the different bits and pieces of what I call the technical debt that we built up over the last 20, 30 years. And the interest payments now are at such a place that we can't even make the interest payments, let alone hope to pay down that technical debt. Layer on to that we all hear about the cloud, but the cloud means a little bit something different to each of us, and some of us can't take advantage of it for different reasons, whether that might be regulatory reasons. We spoke to a customer earlier this week that said, I would love to go to the cloud, but I have two challenges. One is around the privacy of my patient's data, which is certainly a critical thing to be taken care of. But equally, the way my budgeting comes, I cannot deal with the utility pricing of the cloud. So we all have, while we may want to get there, we don't know what the path might be, and we need to think about how would we get there in a way that fits, the different regulations that we're under now and different, budgetary restraints that we're under. All while everyone is talking about digital transformation, and if you ask 10 people what digital transformation is, you will get 11 different answers. It's not unlike DevOps. And people are talking about modernizing their apps so they can take advantage of scale, so they can take advantage of greater efficiencies. But what is it specifically? Really what it is just the process of aligning the legacy software that you have now with the current needs that you now have. You bought a lot of this software, you bought a lot of this infrastructure in a very different world than you're in today. How do you align what you have with where you need to be today and where you need to be going? And most often this will entail, how are you going to move it to the cloud? And if not to the cloud, at least to a cloud-ready state, so that when things change, whether that's regulations, the way budgets work, the way regulations around patient data from the example before, that you can go to the cloud. If you think of once upon a time, the federal government couldn't go to the cloud at all. Now they may go under Protected B. So rules and regulations do change over time. I'm reminded of the old saying, the wheel turns, it turns slowly, but it turns. So over time, we will get there. How do we set ourselves up for success in the future while we're still dealing with all the technical debt and the interest on that technical debt, if you will? So it really starts around our goals. What we typically see, not even typically, what we always see is a decision to modernize. It's driven out of a requirement to scale, a security issue, or being able to address a security issue. We all know the old joke that you have no security budget until your first hack, and then suddenly you have all the money in the world to deal with it. Economics around cost, the cost to do something now versus the cost if you don't do something now. And then certainly speed. How do I respond to the needs of the citizenry, to the needs of other stakeholders quickly? So we always see that one of those four things drives a decision to modernize. Once you've made that decision, you start to see other ways that you can unlock value. Maybe you start to move towards an application-led approach. The applications that we need are going to drive our decision-making, as opposed to forcing the apps and their scalability or lack of scalability into the infrastructure we have now. It can also start to touch on your cloud journey. Again, not everybody can go to the cloud today, but everybody ought to be thinking about how they might be able to move to the cloud. And as you move through that, you really do start your journey to modernizing the applications. You start to see apps becoming more services, the infrastructure being led by the apps, not the other way around. You get a lot of operational efficiencies being driven out of that, and you start to address governance and compliance on different apps, whether they need to remain on premise but in a cloud-ready state, or whether they can indeed move to a cloud infrastructure. Why would you modernize? Why would you change anything, right? I mean, in IT, we're taught to believe if it's not broken, don't fix it. The reality is lots and lots of things are broken. We need to start fixing them because, again, we're paying deep interest on the technical debt that we've built up over the last 20, 30 years. And some of the key reasons, if you take a step back from that, is just around improving service, whether that's interdepartmentally or facing your citizens, whether that's around fiscal responsibility. We are not going to be getting, no one's budget increases massively. We need to do more with less, but there is a way to do that when you start to work with commodity cloud and start to really pay for what you need, as opposed to sitting in a situation where you've got a huge amount of processing power sitting there doing very little most of the time, when you could use that compute for other for other services or for net new services. All of this eventually leads you to be able to simplify your operations, move to pay as you go, and accelerate DevOps or DevSecOps as you've defined it within your organization. And then as a taxpayer, the ones that's most important to me is being able to respond to the citizenry. We Canadians, and I love to bring this up, I lived in Europe for 15 years. I recently moved back to Canada after 3 years, moved back to Ottawa. It is mind-boggling to me how slowly we respond to the citizens in this country. We do a great job compared to others, but if you look at even countries like Belgium, Estonia, the Netherlands, everything is done much faster. It's done online. It's done through apps, literally on your mobile phone, and it's been like that for years. As Canadians, we're now expecting the governments and municipalities and healthcare providers to be able to respond to us as quickly as Amazon or Microsoft might. So these are things to think about. How can we move, again, with all that technical debt we have? How do we get from where we're at to where we need to be, and check some of these boxes off? And while it's all great in theory, there's a lot to think about. Let's say you're fully bought in and say, you know what, I want to be able to do all these things. I see the value in pay-as-you-go. I see the value in being able to quickly respond. Certainly if the last however many months it's been, I guess 1,000 months it feels like since March, has taught us is we need to be able to do things quickly and turn on a dime, because things change very, very quickly. They seem to change faster now than ever before. To take advantage of that, what do I need to think about first so that I'm making smart payments against that technical debt? You need to start to think about the use cases that you want to address, which ones make sense to address, in what order they make sense to address. We've all seen these massive revolutionary projects that didn't take a step back and say to themselves, all right, how do I do this in small bite-sized pieces and build the muscles to be able to carry this project all the way through? So you need to think about the use cases and what the best places to start are. Then you need to think about how that change is going to affect what you're already doing today. Right? Change management is critical here. Then if we speak about actually modernizing without disrupting anything, that's the classic cliche, IT cliche of changing the engine on the plane while you're in flight. But you do absolutely need to think about how you're going to address it, and how you're going to ensure that you're not disrupting what you're already doing while you make that swap over, right? That is, to me, the second most critical piece. The most critical piece to me is when you're ready to move to public cloud, how are you going to deal with data sovereignty? Not only from the point of view of making sure you've met all the regulations that are in place, but perhaps exceeding them as well, right? For federal government, we've got Protected B. What do we have for healthcare, right? What's going to address that where patient data is sitting? I know how to address that in Belgium and the Netherlands, but how do we address it here in Canada? I haven't seen a lot around that. I believe there's some folks on the line from Manitoba. I'm a Leafs fan. I definitely don't want my data sitting with a Winnipeg Jets fan under any circumstances. So how do we, and I'm only half kidding, how do we address data sovereignty? That, to me, is the most critical of all these points. So at CDW, we took a step back and said, wow, this is a lot. There's a lot to think about here. There is a lot of change management that has to be done, a lot of project management. Who is the one company that could do this? And as we thought about it, we took a step back. We realized there isn't any one company. No one single company can help you address this. I'm sure there'll be tons of companies out there that tell you they're the one. They don't exist. They're pulling your leg, or they're deluding themselves. So what we said is, if no one single company can do this, who do we put together? What coalition do we build so we can actually solve for this? So what we put together is a partnership with VMWARE TANZU, which is TANZU Kubernetes Grid. I'm sure we've all heard the word Kubernetes, and it means a little something different to each of us. And Palo Alto Networks for security. We felt between the three of us, we'd be able to handle the actual containerization and modernization platform with TANZU. We'd be able to handle the security requirements, which need to be end-to-end here. This isn't a case of, well, if I protect the containers, I'm okay. Well, what about the cloud or the on-premise piece? What about further up the stack? What about building a secure software supply chain? That's why we involve Palo Alto and specifically their Prisma product. But again, it was around bringing best of breed together. And obviously enough, as Canada's leading systems integrator, we felt we knew we had the internal skills around professional services and managed services, but obviously we needed to have the right partners, which is why we brought TANZU and PAN on board. Excuse me. This is a high level, I call it our architecture, our high level architecture of how this is put together. You'll see at the bottom that we indicate modern infrastructure, and that's either on premise or in the cloud itself. Running on top of that, the application runtime is obviously enough Docker supported by VMware with TANZU Kubernetes Grid. So VMware's version of Kubernetes, their supported version of Kubernetes, which is, excuse me, which is downstream of Kubernetes, and you're still using standard stock Kubernetes, but you're getting enterprise level support. We all know Docker and Kubernetes are open source projects. Wrapped at each level of this, whether it's the infrastructure itself, whether it's the application runtime, or whether it's the development framework, Prisma is wrapping all of this with security at every single layer of the stack. Now, the critical thing here is that when you take TANZU Kubernetes Grid, what you're setting yourself up for is portability between any cloud or any on-premise setup that includes TANZU. So if you think back to attempts in the past to do a workload migration, to move to AWS, to move to Google, to move to Microsoft, you always had to write or refactor or rehost or replatform to that cloud. Once you've refactored, rehosted, replatformed, you pick which one of those 6 R's that you've done to that cloud, you're now locked to that cloud. Nobody tells you that. That's one of those things that they sort of keep, behind the curtain, but you've locked to that cloud now. So let's say, for example, and I don't want to pick on anyone, but let's say, for example, that you've refactored, rehosted, replatformed, whichever, to AWS, and for whatever reason, pricing's changed, regulations have changed, something has happened, you want to move off of AWS to Azure, you now have to go through that full lift and shift again, and vice versa, right? There's no clean bounce between them path. Because TANZU abstracts everything below themselves, much the same way as virtualization abstracted physical hardware, you now can move your application workloads, their containers and microservices, to any other cloud. Or in the case of customers that say, hey, you know what, I cannot move to the cloud because of patient privacy regulations or whatever governance I'm under, you can certainly run TANZU on premise using the same interface, virtual center that you use to manage your vSphere. So you have the same single pane of glass. You're running it on premise. You're now cloud ready. The day comes that rules change, regulations change, but the way budgets are a lot had changed, and you can move to the cloud simply by a single click. Say now I'm no longer going to be on this piece of hardware. I now want to move to this this cloud. And again, you have full portability, so you're not locked to a particular cloud or a particular hardware vendor. Much again, we think back to the early 2000s when we started moving from physical hardware to virtual hardware. It didn't matter if it was Dell, HP, Fujitsu, IBM, Whitebox, whoever, we had the ability to do that because of the layer of abstraction. This is a further layer of abstraction that brings us into the container and Kubernetes fold. Excuse me. So why TANZU? And I've touched on some of this. It's a consistent, unified model. You're going to be able to manage your virtual machines and containers across your data center or the cloud, really, and the cloud from one place, using a tool you're already familiar with, your teams are already familiar with, and they already know how to use. More importantly, or perhaps as importantly, you can now move at a speed that works for you and move at your pace, right? And that's critically important. I'm not a believer in when we do these types of what end up being revolutionary shifts from physical to virtual, from virtual to containerized, of doing it whole hog. It's much better to go at a slower pace, use the DevOps model of build the muscles and iterate on what you've done and continue to do that. So you have a virtuous circle of we're adding more and we're paying off that technical debt. We're getting ahead of the interest on that technical debt. The way to do that is at a slow but steady wins the race pace, not a revolutionary pace. So that's why VMware. Why Palo Alto Networks and specifically Prisma? Palo Alto Networks has the best containerized security platform, bar none. We looked at all of them, we tested all of them, we more than tested all of them. There's no doubt whatsoever that Palo Alto has got you covered top to bottom, left and right. You are covered north, south, east, and west with Palo Alto, especially with their acquisition of Twistlock a couple of years ago, which is now baked into the Prisma security solution. Absolutely rock solid security there. And again, through all layers, including and to me critically at the software supply chain, making sure that if you're not going to be having issues from the inside out, because we know we get attacked from the outside in, but attacks also or even mistakes that leave security holes often come from the inside out, and Prisma has you covered again at every single level of the stack. And then finally, CDW, where are we in all of this? We're there on design, we're there on architecture, we're there helping you with the actual migration with professional services and testing of the final solution so that you've got something that's rock solid, as well as training your folks to be able to take over once day two operations begin. Or if you choose, look, we want to run this, but we don't want to manage it. We also have managed services wrapped around this, so you can just focus on your part of the equation and not have to deal with managing the plumbing, if you will. So I mentioned the 6 R's, something to think about as you start to noodle on, what's my next step in my organization to address some of this. I'm not going to, hopefully, I'm not going to get, I'm not going to run out and try to boil the ocean in one day. How am I going to address my different applications, the different types of applications I have? And really it boils down to roughly roughly 6 things, and I will argue with you that 2 and 3 are really a hair splitting, but let's go through them. Repurchase is obvious enough. You're going to drop a piece of software and repurchase something. We often don't have that luxury for mission critical, for business critical applications, but there may be a few where repurchase is a more sensible option. Rehosting is when you literally just lift and shift. It's probably one of the most dangerous ones that's up there, just a straight lift and shift. Replatforming is lifting it, tweaking it, and then shifting it, and that's where we see most folks land, and that makes sense. As you move something from an on-premise legacy application into a containerized environment, it would need to be tweaked, so that makes the most sense typically. Refactoring and re-architecting, my number one favorite thing about moving back to Canada and speaking English again is all the euphemisms we use. Refactoring and re-architecting means what you think it means. It means rewriting it. It means starting from scratch on it. That may be necessary, or it may make sense depending on feature functionality that you want to add, or perhaps the back end architecture is something like a mainframe, and you simply don't have the skill sets available, and it's highly unlikely that they're going to become available to deal with the application that lives there. So it may make sense then to rewrite it or refactor, re-architect it. You may retire some of them. Some may have be past their useful best before date, and it may actually be possible to retire them. And then some will need to be retained. Some, and again, I'm thinking of the mainframe applications. Some may need to continue to live there, and you'll come back to them after you've paid your interest and you've paid down technical debt elsewhere. You may say, okay, we've now built enough muscles that now we can go back and attack those ones. And in the meantime, they will sit where they're at and run as they're running, and that's where we land with retain. So to wrap up, before I'll take some questions, so hopefully you've got some questions for me. This is really about simplifying the journey, but again, doing it in an evolutionary way, not a revolutionary way. And you need to look at how you're going to migrate the workloads, how scalability, and where you're going to need scalability. Let's say if we think about CRA, they're always busy, but when they are most busy, there are specific times of the year, and at those specific times of the year, they need a ton of extra compute. But what is that extra compute doing in the meantime? It still needs to be cared for. It still needs to be fed. The old joke from the Docker's days is moving things from pets, and we all have our pet server that we care and feed, versus cattle. If a cow's not working out, we all know what happens to it, right? So that's really changing our mindset around what the infrastructure ought to look like, and where we need scalability and why, and where to make those tweaks in our planning. I'll hammer on this one till the day I die, the importance of data sovereignty, how critically important it is that municipal or federal data stays where it ought to be staying, and doesn't end up under different legal jurisdictions and places where folks may not have Canadians' best interests at heart. Critically important thing to take into account as you make your changes and as you start your planning. Security. If you don't know security is important by now, I don't know what to tell you. That is so tied so tightly to sovereignty to me. It's critically important. whether it's municipal, provincial, or federal data, that it's staying in Canada where it ought to be staying, and that it is as secure as it can possibly be. And then finally, right, as we move and as things change and as new folks come into the industry, they're coming with different skill sets. They're coming expecting really to work with microservices, to work with Kubernetes and similar tools. We need to start if we're going to get the best and brightest folks working on these things, we need to really set the table for them. So these are all things to think about. And again, as we set the table for them, a big part of that is ensuring that the cost that they're going to inherit of this technical debt and the interest on that technical debt is as limited as it can be. And with that, I'm very happy to take any questions that there may be.
I do not see any questions, Glenn.
I wasn't controversial enough then if there's no questions. I thought for sure that the folks from Manitoba would have something to say about the Jets. Any questions at all from anybody?
Someone is asking, what role does CDW play in all of this?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the role that we play in all of this is professional services. We provide the professional services. We can provide the managed services if that's something that makes sense for you. We certainly do it for other customers. We provide project management, and we provide the single point of contact, the one hand to shake and one neck to break between the three partners. Now the question that I would have thought somebody would have asked is, this sounds great, when is it going to be available? And the answer to that question is, it's been available since the 1st of November. So if you're sitting out there and saying, well, I'd like to have another conversation about this, or have a conversation that's more specific to my unique requirements, reach out to us. This isn't something that we're going to have. This is something that's available now. All right, perfect. Well, with that, I will give everybody some time back and wish you a good it's not a long weekend, I'm getting ahead of myself. Wish you a good weekend, and thanks very much for joining us today.